The pale morning light quietly seeped through the wooden window frames, pooling into thin wisps that floated in the air. Eleanor Carter, Ellie, as Michael used to call her, stood silently in the small kitchen, her hands moving instinctively to brew the coffee, though her mind was lost somewhere in a past that refused to close. 4 years, long enough for someone to learn to accept, and for those around her to gently urge her to let go. But for Ellie, each morning still began the same. 2 coffee mugs set on the table, one for her, one for Michael, even though the mug on the left always stayed cold and still, like the void that ruled her heart. Outside, a dense mist coiled around the little wooden house, like a damp blanket stretching from the distant Adira Mountains. Ellie raised her cup, seeking a little warmth, when a silent movement at the wooden steps made her freeze. A figure stood there, hazy at first, then slowly sharpening through the white fog. A large, weathered shepherd dog was watching her. Its deep amber eyes carried no fear like lost animals usually do. Instead, within those eyes was a quiet, unwavering resolve, as if it had crossed countless seasons of storms and rains just to reach this place. But it wasn't just the dog's sudden appearance that left Ellie frozen. It was what it carried in its mouth. A blue Gore-Tex jacket, so familiar that just a glance was enough for her to recognize it. That jacket Michael had worn on that final morning. The coffee cup slipped from her hands, and the crash of shattering porcelain echoed in the stillness. But Ellie barely heard it. Her heart thudded wildly, each beat stabbing painfully inside her chest. Slowly, she walked toward the door, her hand trembling as she pulled it open with a creak. The smell of wet earth and mist wrapped around her, cold and heavy. The dog remained still, only its tail faintly stirring like a slow breeze. "Hello there?" Ellie croaked, her voice raspy, as if she had fought through 1,000 fears to speak. The dog stepped forward, one step, then another, until Ellie could see the patches of dried mud on its gray-brown fur, the scars healing along its front legs, and the worn leather collar loosely clinging to its neck, stripped of any tag or mark. It dropped the jacket at her feet, then sat down, never breaking eye contact. There was no rush, no hesitation, only silent waiting, as if the dog understood that after 4 long years, this was the one moment that could bridge the broken chasm between reality and hope. Ellie bent down, her fingers trembling violently as they touched the cold, muddy fabric. Memories surged back. Michael, that morning, turning to smile, zipping up his jacket, laughing. "I'll be back before dinner. Don't finish all the chicken soup." A tear slipped quietly onto the mud-streaked sleeve. She pressed the jacket against her chest, desperate to embrace the last remaining piece of memory. The scent of damp earth and faded sweat clung to it, but hidden deep within was the lingering trace of sandalwood, Michael's favorite scent, an ephemeral presence, yet strong enough to tear down the walls of loneliness Ellie had built around herself for 4 years. She sank onto the wooden steps, clutching the jacket tightly. The dog approached silently, nudging her arm with its nose. A touch of reminder, of comfort, of urging. Ellie looked up into the dog's calm eyes. No words were needed. She knew. The dog hadn't come here by chance. It carried a story yet untold. A message from deep within the mountains, where Michael might still be waiting. "Him," she whispered, resting her hand gently on the dog's head. It tilted its head slightly, accepting her touch with a gentleness that spoke of a bond already formed beyond reason. In the distance, the Adira trees were still swallowed by dense fog. But within Ellie, something began to glow faintly, a fragile but stubborn spark of hope, as steady and true as the faithful creature sitting before her. Ellie clutched the jacket tightly, the cold, damp fabric sending shivers through her body. The smell of wet earth, old sweat, and forgotten days seeped into her skin, a heavy reminder that what she held was not just an object. It was the last breath of Michael left in this vast, indifferent world. She bowed her head, letting her tears soak into the rough fabric. Then, as her hand brushed along the jacket's seam, she felt something hard beneath the lining. Her trembling fingers found a small slit at the pocket's edge and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. So thin and worn, it seemed ready to disintegrate, if not handled with care. Despite the water stains and the blurred ink, the familiar handwriting was unmistakable. Michael's hand, each hurried stroke echoing the beat of his heart in that moment. Desperate, urgent, but refusing to give up. "My dearest Ellie," she read, mouthing the words as if afraid that speaking them aloud would cause the paper to vanish into dust. "If you're reading this, it means I'm in trouble. I got lost. Went deeper into the cave system than I intended." The rest of the note had faded into purple smudges, like bruises on the skin of time. Only one line remained clear at the bottom, a stubborn flame defying the storm. "I love you forever." Ellie pressed the paper against her chest, as if willing her heartbeat to keep the fading words alive. And in that moment, the memory of their last morning together flooded her mind, so vivid it nearly broke her. Michael standing at the steps, zipping his blue jacket up to his chin, compass in hand, the old one she had gifted him for his birthday the year before. His bright smile shone through the morning mist. He turned back, winking playfully, teasing, "Don't finish all the chicken soup. I'll be back soon." And then he vanished into the sea of mist. That last look, Ellie remembered, had burned like a lantern against the night. But 4 years had passed since then. 4 years of setting out 2 coffee cups every morning. 4 years of lying awake at night, listening to the wind moaning through the cracks, wondering if it was Michael calling to her from somewhere far away. Beside her now, Bruno, the shepherd dog Ellie had never met before, sat quietly. Those deep amber eyes, as bottomless as a well, glowed with a strange understanding. No words were spoken, but Ellie knew, instinctively, that Bruno had seen more than she could ever imagine. The dog nudged closer, his nose brushing her wrist, a soft, patient encouragement. Ellie looked into Bruno's eyes. There was no demand, no pity, only a relentless steadiness, as if he were saying, "Don't fall. We still have a journey ahead." Suddenly, Ellie noticed. Bruno wore no tag, only a tattered leather collar, the silver buckle dulled by time and storms. Etched into the worn leather, barely visible beneath layers of dirt, was a name. Bruno. She whispered it, like a vow. Bruno. The dog's ears twitched, and for a fleeting moment he wagged his tail, a tremor so small it nearly broke Ellie's heart. Bruno had brought her the jacket. Bruno had crossed forests, storms, and loneliness to reach her. And Bruno had no intention of leaving after delivering his message. No. His eyes said their journey was just beginning. Ellie clutched the damp note in her hand and stood up, the jacket still wrapped tightly in her arms. Behind her, the little house stood silent, a place where she had imprisoned herself in grief for 4 long years. But ahead, past the weathered wooden steps, stood Bruno, waiting, his tail gently swaying, his eyes steady like a quiet lantern in the fog. Ellie knew. Her heart knew. The jacket, the note, the shepherd who had come from nowhere, they were all messages. A road was opening, and if she was brave enough to walk it, maybe, just maybe, she would find more than she ever dared hope for. And she was ready. Ellie bent down, pressed her forehead to Bruno's, and whispered like a promise, "Let's go find him together, Bruno." Bruno remained standing there, still and unwavering, as Ellie slowly backed into the house, clutching the jacket and the faded paper tightly against her chest. The kitchen, once so familiar, now seemed to close in around her, no longer a place of safety but a suffocating room where a tidal wave of emotion surged within her. Her hands still trembling, Ellie reached for the wall-mounted phone, her fingers feeling out the familiar numbers she hadn't dialed in so long. Peter Walker, the former inspector who had led Michael's search party 4 years ago, had left her a message the day he retired. "If you ever find anything, Ellie, anything at all, don't hesitate to call me." The phone rang 4 times before a rough, steady voice answered on the other end. "Eleanor, are you all right?" That simple question shattered the fragile shell Ellie had been struggling to maintain. "Peter?" Her voice broke, each word torn from a breathless gasp. "I found Michael's jacket. A dog, a shepherd, brought it to my doorstep." There was a long silence on the other end, a pause heavy with emotion barely held back. Then Peter spoke, calm and firm. "Don't touch anything else, Ellie. I'm coming. 20 minutes." Hanging up, Ellie let herself collapse into the creaky old chair. The mud-streaked blue jacket lay bundled in her lap, while Bruno, the strange creature who had become her steadfast companion in these few short hours, had followed her inside, lying quietly by her feet like a living shadow. Ellie looked down at him. Beneath the dust-matted fur and the marks of hard weather, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. A worn brown leather collar, its surface scarred and cracked like the rings of an ancient tree, each groove telling the story of time and a journey etched in survival. She bent lower, gently parting the thick fur to look closer. The silver buckle was tarnished, the tag long gone. Only faint traces of old, almost invisible letters remained, as if a name had once been engraved there. "Bruno," she whispered, repeating the name as if affirming his place in this world. Bruno lifted his head, warm brown eyes locking onto hers, not with the look of a wild animal, not just simple loyalty, but a deeper connection, as though some unspoken pact between them had been made long before they met this morning. Ellie reached out, stroking the top of his head, feeling the strong, wiry muscles beneath the tangled fur. Every patch of dried mud, every faded scar on Bruno's body told a story of waiting, of relentless steps through freezing winters and parched summers, all to find a human long forgotten by the world's maps. "He sent you, didn't he?" Ellie murmured, her voice softening, no longer trembling but weighted with deep, quiet gratitude. Bruno tilted his head slightly, his eyes shining in the faint morning light, as if to silently confirm her words. Outside, the first streaks of sunlight pierced through the thick mist, casting pale golden hues onto the rotting wooden steps. A new morning was beginning, but for Ellie, it was the start of something far greater, a journey to reclaim what she thought she had lost forever. A soft noise in the yard pulled her from her thoughts. Ellie stood up, still clutching the jacket to her chest, as Bruno rose silently beside her, body tensed in alert readiness. In the distance, the headlights of a small truck slowly approached the gravel road leading to the house. Peter had arrived, and Ellie knew. There was no turning back now. She crouched down, resting her hand over Bruno's chest, feeling the steady, deep heartbeat beneath her palm. "We'll find the truth, Bruno," she whispered, making a solemn vow. "No matter what it takes." Bruno gently wagged his tail, a silent, steady agreement, and together they stepped out to greet the dim first light of a fateful new day. The old pickup truck rumbled down the gravel path, pulling up near the porch in a thin cloud of dust. Ellie tightened her grip on the jacket and the faded note, her heart both kindling a tiny flame of hope and constricting with nameless fear. Peter Walker climbed out, his movements a little stiff from an old knee injury, but his eyes remained sharp and alert, just as they had been in the days when he led search teams through these mountains. He surveyed the scene, his gaze pausing briefly on the shards of a broken coffee cup scattered on the steps, before landing on Ellie and Bruno standing close together. For a moment, Ellie caught a flicker in his eyes, a mixture of surprise, confusion, and then, unexpectedly, a deep, raw emotion when he saw Bruno. Peter took a few steps forward, his boots crunching on the gravel, and stopped just a few feet away, his eyes locked on the mud-caked shepherd at Ellie's side. "Well now," he breathed, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "It can't be." Ellie turned to Bruno. The dog stood still, head held high, ears perked, his amber eyes glowing under the misty morning light. In that moment, Bruno looked more like a monument than a living creature, a symbol of patience and loyalty, standing guard at the fragile threshold between hope and despair. Peter dropped to one knee, grimacing from the old injury but paying it no mind, and stretched out a broad, rough hand, palm up, a gesture of gentleness and deep respect. Bruno lifted one paw, stepped forward, and gently touched his forehead to Peter's hand. A simple gesture, yet one that made Peter's eyes sting with tears. "Ellie," Peter rasped, looking up at her. "Do you know who this friend is?" Ellie could only shake her head, her mouth moving but unable to form words. Peter closed his hand lightly, as if trying to hold on to the fleeting miracle before him, then slowly rose, never taking his eyes off Bruno. "We call him the Mountain Guardian," Peter said, his voice low and reverent, as if recounting a sacred tale. "For the past 4 years, in these woods, there have been stories of a lone shepherd dog. No one knows where he came from. No one could catch him. But everyone lucky enough to encounter him, they all shared one thing in common. They survived." Peter paused, his gaze drifting into the distance as if seeing scenes long buried in memory. "A lost child in the rain said a big dog kept watch by her side until rescuers arrived. A group of stranded climbers told of a dog leading them to safety through a blizzard when their GPS failed. Even search teams like ours, many of us caught glimpses of him, following from afar like a silent guardian spirit." Ellie held her breath. She looked down at Bruno, the silent mountain guardian, and for the first time, she fully understood the depth behind those amber eyes. Bruno wasn't just a stray, not just a lonely wanderer. He was a protector, a fragile yet steadfast thread connecting lost souls to life, to home, to hope. Peter moved closer, his hand brushing over the old leather collar. "This collar?" he muttered. "It once held a tag. He must have belonged to someone, maybe a companion or maybe more." His voice trailed off, shadowed with sorrow that mirrored Ellie's unspoken fears. Could it be that Bruno had once been Michael's companion? That during all those years of disappearance, Michael had not been alone? Bruno looked up at her, his golden brown eyes holding no bitterness, no sorrow, only boundless patience and quiet endurance. Like a lantern kept burning through endless winters, fueled by a single belief. Someone would come. Someone would understand. Ellie knelt, pressing her forehead gently to Bruno's, whispering a thank you too deep for words. Peter stood silent, then slowly nodded. "If Bruno has chosen you, Ellie," he said gravely, his voice mingling with the mountain winds, "then we can't turn away from where he's leading us." Above them, the sky was beginning to break apart, shafts of light piercing the mist into delicate fragments like shattered glass. Ellie clutched Michael's jacket tighter, feeling the crumpled letter against her heart, and placed her unwavering trust in Bruno, the guardian of the mountains, and her own battered heart. A journey awaited them, somewhere deep in the woods, and this time, Ellie knew, she would not walk it alone. The deep blue jacket lay spread out across the old wooden table on the porch, like a silent map leading back to a past thought to be forever closed. Peter Walker leaned in closer, his hands, hardened by years spent battling cases and trekking through mountains, moving slowly but with certainty along every fold, every patch of caked mud. Ellie stood beside him, her hands clenched tightly together, her entire body strung taut like a wire, afraid that even the slightest noise could shatter the fragile hope just beginning to bloom. Bruno sat pressed against her leg, his body upright, sharp eyes never leaving Peter's hands, as if he too were inspecting, judging the truth. Peter pulled a small magnifying glass from his coat pocket, his hands methodically scanning the critical areas, the cuffs, the hem, the shoulders, the underarms where fabric usually faced the harshest elements. After a long, focused silence, he looked up, a heavy doubt clouding his eyes. "Look closely, Ellie," Peter said, his voice low and firm. He pointed at the fabric near the hem of the jacket, where faint traces of brown earth clung. If this jacket had truly been left outside for 4 years, it wouldn't look like this. Even the best Gore-Tex would become brittle, faded, maybe tear apart like paper after so much exposure. He carefully pulled the zipper. It gave a soft, smooth hiss, steady and unbroken, as if it had only seen a few seasons of weather, not 4 years of brutal wilderness. Peter turned the jacket inside out, checking the lining. There are no signs of deep water damage, no heavy mold that you'd expect from years in the damp. This mud, it's fresh. It hasn't seeped deeply into the fibers. He pulled out a small flashlight, shining it along the seams. Under the beam, the mud gleamed a reddish brown, a telltale signature of the highland soil in Adera, but it hadn't yet whitened into the dry, powdery residue that came with enduring a winter freeze. Peter let out a long breath, his fingers tapping lightly against the table, each beat a silent mark of deep thought. "This jacket," he finally said, his gaze sharp as steel, "has only been exposed to the elements for a few months, maybe a year at most, not any longer." Ellie felt the ground beneath her shift. The dark, broken nights, the hollow dreams of loss, all seemed to melt into this one moment, this breathtaking realization. Time had not swallowed Michael whole that day. Michael had lived, at least far longer than anyone had dared to hope. Her arms dropped to her sides, her heart heaving, her heart pounding wildly, as if afraid this miracle might slip away if she dared blink. Beside her, Bruno stood up and pressed his head gently against her thigh. A firm but tender reminder. Don't be afraid. The truth has begun to reveal itself. Ellie dropped to her knees, throwing her arms around Bruno, clutching his sturdy, weathered body close. She buried her face into his mud-streaked fur without hesitation, overwhelmed by a raw, primal comfort flooding through her chest. Peter let them have their moment. He stood quietly by the table, one hand slowly brushing over the jacket's surface as if sharing a silent, unspeakable emotion. After a while, he spoke again, his voice steady and deep, like a spade sinking into the earth. "If the jacket only appeared recently, there are 2 possibilities, Ellie. 1, Michael is alive somewhere and kept it hidden until now. Or 2, someone found him or traces of him, and the jacket is the message." Bruno let out a low, rumbling whine, his gaze shifting towards the deep woods behind the house. He turned back to look at Ellie, then Peter. Urging, pleading. Ellie nodded slowly, tears clinging to the corners of her eyes. But deep inside her, a flame had finally been lit. A flame that no mountain storm, no darkness, could extinguish again. She placed a hand on Bruno's neck, whispering, her voice trembling but brimming with determination. "We'll go, Bruno. Lead me, no matter how far we have to go." Peter looked at the pair, this frail, slender woman with eyes burning bright, and the silent shepherd, as strong and steady as the spirit of the mountains themselves, and he nodded gravely. "We'll find the truth," he said, "and this time no one gets left behind." Far off in the misty Adira ranges, it seemed a whisper stirred on the wind, a call from secrets long buried, from bonds that had never truly been broken. And Ellie, with Bruno by her side, would follow that call to the very end. The air on the porch was still heavy with mist, carrying the faint, rich scent of wet earth after the early morning rain. Ellie hugged the jacket tightly against her chest, her heart still trembling from the fragile hope that had just been rekindled. Beside her, Bruno lay flat on the ground, head resting on his front paws, amber eyes watching her every move, as if afraid she might collapse under the weight of the emotions surging inside her. They had barely begun to nurture the first flicker of light in their dark journey when the sound of a car engine rumbled along the gravel road, harsh and cold. Ellie lifted her head, heart tightening as she recognized the familiar silver SUV pulling up. David Carter, Michael's older brother, stepped out, tall and solid, his face lined with deep worry. He walked towards Ellie with determined strides, his gray eyes sharp with a mix of sternness and weariness. "Ellie," David called out, his voice rough and heavy, as if he had spent a long time choosing the words before speaking. "We need to talk." Ellie straightened her back, her hand instinctively reaching toward Bruno for support, while the dog remained still by her side, watchful. David didn't spare a glance for Bruno. His focus was fixed entirely on Ellie, as though trying to transmit a heavy truth directly into her. "You've suffered enough," David continued, voice lowering. "I know you loved Michael more than anything, but it's been 4 years, Ellie. 4 years of searching, waiting, and living with broken dreams. You need to let go." Ellie tightened her grip on the jacket, the only thing left connecting her to Michael now. Bruno let out a soft, concerned whine, sensing the turmoil tearing at her heart. "I found this jacket, David," Ellie said, her voice small but unyielding. "It hasn't weathered. It means Michael, he could still be alive, or at least someone protected him all this time." David sighed, his eyes softening with sorrow. He stepped closer, laying a firm hand on her shoulder. "Sometimes," he said gently but firmly, "what we find are just illusions shaped by our desperation. A jacket, a strange dog, they could all be coincidences. You can't chain yourself to a fragile hope and break your heart all over again." His words sliced into Ellie like a cold blade. She bowed her head, saying nothing, only gripping the worn fabric tighter, feeling it bite into her palm. Bruno stood up, pressing his nose into her hand again, steady, grounding. A silent message. "Trust your heart." A sudden voice called from the doorway, cutting through the tension. Sarah Miller, Ellie's closest friend from college, rushed out, her petite face alight with a fierce, unwavering concern. Without asking, Sarah understood. She grabbed Ellie's hand, squeezing it tight with her own small but strong fingers. "Ellie," Sarah said, her voice warm and steady like the morning light. "Listen to me. If deep down you believe Michael is still alive, if your instincts, and Bruno's, are guiding you forward, then don't give up." Sarah met her gaze, eyes burning with an unshakable faith. "Not everyone will understand. Not everyone will believe it. But the ones who truly love you will respect your choice." For the first time in 4 years, Ellie didn't feel alone against the crushing wall of doubt. Bruno wagged his tail softly, his eyes glowing with a tender, gentle hope. David watched them for a long moment. Then, silently, he nodded. Without another word, he turned, walking slowly back to his car, leaving the porch empty except for the whisper of the wind through the barren trees. Ellie looked up at the sky, where the thinning clouds were starting to break apart, revealing the faint, pale bands of a new day. She turned to Sarah, then knelt, wrapping her arms around Bruno, the silent being who had trusted her even when she doubted herself. "We won't give up," Ellie whispered, a solid vow. "Even if we have to search the deepest corners of the forest, we will find him." Bruno lifted his head, those warm, golden eyes glowing with a deep, knowing understanding, as if he had always known, from the very first moment, that Ellie would find her way, as long as she dared to take the first step. As the sound of David's car engine faded into the distance, leaving only the soft sigh of the wind threading through the dry trees, Ellie stood frozen for a long moment, arms wrapped tightly around the old jacket, as if holding both the past and the future in her embrace. Beside her, Bruno shifted slightly. The large shepherd did not bark or rush her. He simply stood up and silently moved toward the forest's edge, where towering, dense pines wove a deep green wall, waiting in patient silence. Ellie watched Bruno's silhouette, her palms clenching into fists. The emotional storm still left her chest trembling, but it had also ignited within her a steady, fierce flame, unlike anything she had ever felt before. Bruno stopped at the forest's edge, glancing back at her. His gaze glowed with a silent invitation, a quiet promise. "This path won't be easy, but I won't let you walk it alone." Peter Walker came up beside her, gripping his weathered hiking staff firmly. He looked toward where Bruno stood, then turned to meet Ellie's eyes. A silent look, no words needed, full of steady support. "Let's go." Peter said, his voice deep and sure, as solid as the earth beneath their feet. Bruno has led many before. Today he'll lead us. Above them, the sky was darkening, layers of heavy gray clouds piling up like a weighted shroud. The northern wind blew in gusts, carrying icy mist and the sharp scent of a coming storm. Ellie zipped her jacket up to her chin, tucked the old compass into her pocket, and turned to Bruno. "Let's go, Bruno," she whispered, "a solemn ritual before a great journey." Bruno gave a slight nod, and then, without needing another signal, he crossed the threshold of the forest, moving swiftly and gracefully, like a being born of the wild. Ellie and Peter quickly followed. Her boots crunched softly on the thick carpet of rotting leaves, blending with the winds whistling through the tree canopy. Bare branches whipped lightly against her jacket, leaving cold, wet streaks behind. The deeper they went, the heavier and denser the air became. The last weak rays of morning light were quickly swallowed by the thickening storm clouds. In the gathering gloom, Bruno became their only beacon, his fur fading into a ghostly gray, yet his steady gait and the occasional flick of his tail when checking on Ellie tethered her firmly to life. Peter occasionally tied neon-colored fabric strips onto low branches to mark their path, just in case they needed to find their way back. But Ellie didn't focus on that. Her eyes stayed locked on Bruno, clinging to his every movement, as one clings to a final spark of light in a winter storm. Rain began to fall, sharp, icy drops stabbing through her hair and soaking into her skin. The wind howled more fiercely, bending ancient trees until they creaked and wailed like mournful ghosts. But Bruno never hesitated. He wove through old trails, leaping over fallen trunks, weaving through dense underbrush, moving like he knew every breath and heartbeat of this vast forest. Ellie kept close behind, her once faltering steps growing steadier, her ragged breathing finding a rhythm, as if Bruno was syncing her very pulse with his. Somewhere ahead, hidden in the heavy darkness and pounding rain, something awaited them. A secret, a truth, or something deeper Ellie dared not yet name. Bruno suddenly stopped at a shallow hollow, shaded by massive trees. He turned, eyes burning brightly through the mist and rain, as if asking, "Are you ready to cross the threshold of what you thought you knew?" Ellie stepped up beside him, drawing in a deep breath. The scents of wet earth, pine resin, and wild grass mixed with the warm, familiar smell of Bruno's damp fur created a strange, grounding fragrance that steadied her heart. Peter caught up behind them, nodding, signaling he was ready. Ellie placed her hand on Bruno's back, whispering, not just to him, but to herself. "We're not turning back. Lead on, Bruno, take me to the truth." The wind screamed, and the rain lashed across the trees. But Ellie, Bruno, and Peter moved forward into the forest's heart. 3 small points of stubborn light defying the storm raging above the mountains. The rain no longer fell in scattered drops. It hammered down in cold, driving sheets, whipping the soaked forest into a blur of distorted sound and movement. The Adira woods transformed into a misty, unreal sea of noise. Ellie pulled her jacket tighter around herself, but her eyes never left Bruno's figure weaving through the twisted trees and clawing roots. Bruno moved with strange certainty, seemingly unaffected by the storm's fury, his soaked fur dripping, but his gait unwavering and resolute. Peter stayed close behind Ellie, occasionally sweeping a small flashlight through the heavy rain, its feeble beam cutting briefly across dripping bushes and waterlogged trails. Suddenly, Bruno froze, his body taut like a bowstring, ears erect, eyes locked forward with absolute focus. Ellie and Peter instinctively halted too, hearts hammering. Beneath the soft, sodden earth, faint but clear, were human footprints, fresh and distinct, pressed deep into the muddy ground as if life had just passed by. Ellie knelt, trembling, reaching out to brush the edges of the prints. They weren't large, exactly the size she remembered, down to every familiar contour of Michael's feet. Peter cautiously swept his flashlight further ahead. Just a few steps beyond the tracks, draped across an ancient fallen tree, was a climbing rope. Bright red, still pristine, with raindrops sparkling like tiny jewels under the flashlight's glow. Bruno stepped forward, touching his nose to the rope, then looking up at Ellie with silent certainty. He was here. Peter crouched and ran his hand along the rope, uncovering a torn scrap of fabric snagged on a low branch. Pale gray, waterproof, unmistakably the kind of gear Michael used on expeditions. Ellie clutched the fabric tightly, her hand freezing. "Michael," she whispered, her voice dissolving into the rain as if even the forest paused to listen. Peter pulled out Ellie's old compass to check their bearing, but as soon as he released the needle, it spun wildly, unable to settle, as if caught by some unseen force deep underground. He frowned, quickly surveying the surroundings. "This," he muttered, "only happens near strong magnetic interference. Could be a mineral deposit, or an underground cave system." And then, when Peter lowered the beam again, they saw it, a narrow crack in the earth, hidden beneath a tangle of roots and vines. Just wide enough for a person to crawl through, a deep, black maw gaping at them from the forest floor. Bruno stepped toward the opening, his body rigid. He crouched low, ears pricked high, every muscle tense with both caution and unwavering resolve. Ellie approached carefully, feeling the cold, damp breath of air seeping from the fissure, carrying the sharp scent of wet stone and something metallic and ancient, the smell of long-buried secrets. She knelt beside Bruno, meeting his eyes in a moment of profound, wordless understanding. No barking, no urging, only presence, only a silent bond that needed no language. Peter crouched near them, shining the flashlight deep into the crack, only to meet thick, impenetrable darkness. He uncoiled a length of rope, securing it around a sturdy tree, preparing for the unknown ahead. "We found something we never dared hope for," Peter said quietly, his voice trembling not from cold, but from overwhelming emotion. "Michael could have gone in there. He might have left these signs for us." Bruno whined softly, nose pressed to the ground, then looked up urgently, pleading with Ellie not to hesitate any longer. Ellie clenched her fists, steadied her breath, then nodded firmly to Peter. "We have to go in," she whispered. Turning to Bruno, she smiled through tears. "Lead the way, Bruno. I'll follow you, wherever you go." Bruno wagged his tail once, gently, then without waiting for another second, slipped into the narrow black opening. Ellie bent low, flashlight steady in her hand, and crawled in after him, descending into the cold, forgotten belly of the earth, where every breath, every echo, could be a sign of a lost world and of a love that had never given up. The deeper they ventured into the heart of the mountain, the smaller the world around Ellie became, shrinking down to the trembling beam of her flashlight, the ragged sound of her breathing, and the steadfast footfalls of Bruno echoing off the cold stone walls. The heavy, musty air clung to every breath, thick with the scent of wet earth and cold rock. Drops of icy water dripped steadily from the cave ceiling, splattering into stagnant puddles below, creating a grim, monotonous rhythm. Bruno moved cautiously, his paws placing light, precise steps on the slick rocks like a dancer in the darkness. His thick fur, though soaked, stood bristling along his spine, a signal Ellie had learned to recognize. The danger was close. Peter trailed silently behind them, his flashlight sweeping methodically across the walls and hidden corners, his seasoned eyes stretched wide, missing nothing. And then, like a heartbeat stumbling out of rhythm, Bruno stopped abruptly. Ellie froze instantly. She saw his entire body stiffen, ears erect, muscles taut as if bracing against an unseen enemy lurking in the dark. Ellie lowered her flashlight, sweeping it carefully across the ground in front of Bruno, and her heart seized. There, only a few steps ahead, lay a cunning trap, large stones stacked precariously, ready to topple at the slightest touch. A thin tripwire stretched low across the path, nearly invisible without close attention, poised to unleash the full weight of the trap with a single misstep. Peter muttered a curse under his breath and hurried forward to inspect it. He studied the setup closely, his expression growing grim. "This wasn't an accident," Peter said quietly, his voice tight like a drawn wire. "Someone set this deliberately, to stop anyone from getting deeper." Ellie knelt beside Bruno, her palm finding his collar and giving it a graceful, steadying squeeze, both a thank you and a desperate plea for courage. Bruno never looked away from the trap, his breathing slow and deep, radiating a calm focus that bolstered Ellie's own faltering nerves. Peter carefully pulled out a folding knife, slicing the tripwire and using his stick to drag the loose threads clear of their path. A few stones above shifted slightly, tumbling down in a low clatter that echoed like a gunshot through the cave. All of them held their breath. If Bruno hadn't stopped them in time. Ellie shivered, unable to push away the image of them buried alive, entombed in the mountain's cold heart with no one even knowing they were there. She tightened her grip on Michael's jacket, heart pounding with gratitude for Bruno, for this silent shield that had guarded her once again. Peter scanned the surrounding rocks, his face darkening further. "The scrape marks are fresh. Someone's been here, and not long ago." Ellie nodded, swallowing hard, fighting to steady her racing heart. She lifted her gaze and met Bruno's eyes, those fierce, steadfast eyes gleaming like twin stars in the darkness. And she knew, no matter the danger, no matter the unknown ahead, they could not turn back. Bruno lifted his head, sniffed the damp air again, and silently changed course, leading them deeper into the cave. The path grew narrower and more treacherous. The floor was slick with water, the walls jagged like ancient teeth. Yet Bruno pressed forward without hesitation, occasionally glancing back to ensure Ellie still followed, that she had not faltered. Peter moved carefully behind them, marking critical points with extra caution after their near miss. At a sharp bend in the tunnel, Ellie caught a sudden change in the air. Not the natural cold draft, but a faint warmth and a whisper of scent her heart recognized instantly. The smell of burnt pine wood and a hint of sandalwood. The same faint cologne Michael used to wear, woven into her memories of lazy mornings, her head resting against his chest, breathing him in like the very air she needed to survive. Bruno sensed it too. He let out a soft, low bark. Just one, almost a whisper, then turned to look at Ellie, his eyes shimmering with emotion. "Hold on. Life is near." Ellie pressed her hand to his thick, damp fur, whispering through a throat tight with tears. "Keep going, Bruno. Don't let me lose the way." The cave wind howled through narrow cracks. Water dripped from above, echoing with their cautious steps, forming a strange symphony of fear, hope, and relentless determination. And then, from the dense darkness ahead, a new sound emerged, faint, fragile, yet unmistakable. A distant echo, like a radio gasping in its final breaths. From deep within the frozen heart of the mountain, the sound burst forth, like a soul finally breaking free after being imprisoned for too long. The radio's faint, battered voice floated to them, brushing Ellie's heart with invisible fingers. Bruno halted, his solid body lowering as if he too were listening, not with his ears, but with every fiber of his being. His ears pricked, his gaze piercing the thick, suffocating dark. Ellie stood frozen, her hands limp at her sides, flashlight drooping toward the ground, its weak beam barely illuminating the dust drifting through the icy air. Even Peter, the seasoned man who had seen countless strange disappearances, couldn't mask the stunned awe in his face. He bowed his head slightly, as if standing before something greater than science, greater than reason. From the darkness, a slow, aching melody began. I see trees of green, red roses too. Louis Armstrong's raspy, warm voice spilled out into the cave, each note threading through Ellie's veins, slipping past every wall she had built around her heart. each word cut like a delicate blade, slicing open memories she had long buried but never truly forgotten. In her mind, she saw Michael, tall and lean in his faded t-shirt, bare feet skimming the worn wooden floor, a coffee cup in hand as he danced clumsily around their tiny kitchen, singing along to this very song, laughing when he missed a beat, his green eyes sparkling with simple, radiant joy, as if the whole world was contained in that kitchen, and in the arms he wrapped around her. Bruno took one step forward, nose to the ground, then lifted his eyes to meet Ellie's, a silent reminder that those memories didn't just echo in a dream. They were alive, right here, right now. Ellie wiped the tears from her face, gripped her flashlight tighter, and moved forward, every step heavy but unshakable. Each footfall stirred another memory. Michael poring over maps in the morning light, laughing as he skipped stones across a creek, curling beside her at night, reading aloud by the fire. And now his voice mingled with Louis Armstrong's, carried on the waves of the song, "What a wonderful world." Suddenly Bruno surged ahead, his stride lengthening, his body a solid arrow cutting through the mist of memory. Ellie stumbled slightly on the slick rocks, but didn't stop, drawn onward as if by a thread spun from hope and longing. They passed through a narrow slit in the stone, where the wind shrieked like a lost soul. And there, tucked in a small hollow between the bones of the mountain, her flashlight caught on something. A small, battered radio. It lay on the cold ground, shuddering out the final verses of the song, its batteries nearly dead. The casing was scratched and dusty, the signal light blinking faintly like the last heartbeat of something refusing to give up. Next to it, pinned to a rock with a rusted knife, was a scrap of paper. Ellie knelt, her hands trembling as she peeled it away, the words blurring through tears. "If you found this, it means you didn't give up. I'm still waiting for you." Bruno came and rested his head gently on her knee, his eyes deep and silent with understanding. Peter stood back, his lined face collapsing into raw emotion. No words, no explanations, just the sacred weight of the moment. Ellie buried her face into Bruno's warm, rain-scented fur, clinging to him like a lifeline. And in the soft, distant murmur of the mountain, through the flickering light of the dying radio, through the fading strains of "What a Wonderful World," she felt Michael, not just in memory, but in every breath of stone, every pulse of the living earth around her. The radio fell silent at last, but the song remained, echoing inside Ellie, an unfinished promise, an unbroken road. And Bruno, her steadfast companion, stayed beside her, his eyes like two small lamps in the endless dark, guiding her forward toward the place where Michael still waited, and where hope was still burning. As the weak beam of the flashlight pierced through the narrow gap in the rock, an unexpected space opened up before Ellie, Peter, and Bruno. Not grand, not vast, but saturated with the traces of life and hope that had stubbornly fought to survive in the darkness for years. Ellie stood still, gripping the flashlight so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Before she was a makeshift research camp, set up right within the heart of the cave. A faded, double-layered tent, a few small solar panels leaning against the rocky wall, and several battered equipment crates stacked neatly by the tent's side. Bruno moved forward slowly, sniffing every item, checking each remaining breath of life in this forgotten place. His soaked fur clung to his frame, but each step was certain, as if he knew exactly where they needed to go. Ellie followed him, her steps so light they barely touched the stone floor, unwilling to disturb the silence. Outside the tent, she noticed a small fire pit ringed by stones, the ashes still bearing traces not yet fully covered by dust. A plastic water jug lay nearby, a small amount of murky water sloshing inside. Bootprints pressed into the damp soil led from the tent deeper into the cave, fading into the shadows. Peter carefully inspected the surroundings, his flashlight sweeping over geological surveying equipment packed neatly into the wooden crates. A seismograph, a geological compass, mineral sample kits, and several coils of new climbing rope. On a folding table pushed against the stone wall, stacks of hand-drawn maps, notebooks, and technical notes were piled high. Ellie stepped closer, her fingers trembling as she opened one of the notebooks. Across the frayed pages, Michael's familiar handwriting danced, hurried, passionate, filled with physics equations and sketches of minerals bearing properties unseen in any textbook. Bruno sat silently beside the table, his warm brown eyes never leaving Ellie, guarding her memories, her hope. Ellie flipped through a few more pages. One phrase, highlighted in red ink, leaped out at her. Unstable energy-storing mineral, capable of storing 10 times current lithium capacity, must be secured at all costs. Peter leaned over, studying the sketches. Arrows linking layers of geological strata, notes about abnormal magnetic density, all pointing to the fact that Michael had discovered something extraordinary. A discovery so profound it could revolutionize the energy industry, and so dangerous it could make him a target for ruthless interests. Ellie skimmed another bundle of papers, lab results, field measurements, intricate cave maps, and nestled between the cold scientific data were scattered notes, simple but brimming with a universe of meaning. Eleanor must know. She will understand. Bruno, if you find her, bring her here. Don't give up. Ellie looked up at Bruno. He sat still, eyes bright like twin stars in the darkness, his tail giving the slightest, most resolute wag. A silent confirmation. It had been Bruno, all along, guarding this path through 4 long years, with silent loyalty and an understanding deeper than words. Bruno had kept hope alive in a world that had almost forgotten it. Peter picked up a small, hand-drawn map, rough lines leading from the camp deeper into the cave, to a point marked with just 2 words: the gateway. Bruno let out a low whine, then moved forward to touch his nose to the map's edge, urging them onward. Ellie glanced around one last time. Every item, every trace here told a story of solitary survival, of a desperate will to send a signal across the endless dark. She pressed Michael's notebook against her chest like cradling her own heart, then lifted her head, her eyes ablaze with a fierce determination she had never known before. He never gave up, Ellie whispered, and neither will we. Bruno wagged his tail again, the soft scrape of his claws on the stone floor sounding like a small drumbeat, beating with the rhythm of rising hope. Peter nodded, his rugged face softening into a tired but hopeful smile. "Let's keep moving," he said. "We're close now." Outside, the night was pitch black, the storm still raging on the mountain peaks. But deep inside the cold heart of the earth, a flame had been lit. In Ellie's heart, in Bruno's eyes, and in every handwritten word Michael had left behind. The fire of love, loyalty, and an unyielding belief that could never be extinguished. Inside the empty camp, as the flashlight beams wavered over the cold stone walls, a soft but distinct sound came from behind them, the crunch of gravel underfoot. Bruno reacted first. A low growl rumbled in his throat, his wet fur bristling, spine arching in a tense curve. His ears pricked high, his gaze locked sharply into the shifting darkness. Ellie clutched her flashlight tighter, her heartbeat thundering in her chest. Peter quickly shifted his stance, swinging his light forward, casting a harsh beam over the rough walls, where 3 figures slowly emerged. 3 strange men, dressed in dark, worn clothing, their garments stained with dirt and rock dust. Their eyes were cold, hard, and unrelenting. The leader, a tall man with steel-gray eyes, spoke first, his voice low and dry. "You're not allowed to go any further," he said, each word dropping onto the stone floor like a heavy stone. Peter instinctively stepped in front of Ellie, shielding her. Bruno shifted closer to Ellie's side, his body tense, ready for whatever would come. "We're just looking for a loved one," Peter said, his voice steady and deliberate. The tall man sneered, a humorless, mocking smile twisting his mouth. "Her loved one knew too much," he said, his voice sharpening. "He found something he shouldn't have. And if you take another step, you'll never leave this place." Ellie felt her chest constrict, as if invisible hands were squeezing the breath from her lungs. But then Bruno pressed his head lightly against her leg, a silent reassurance. She crouched down, her hand threading through his soaked fur, drawing calm from his steady heartbeat. The man motioned sharply. The two others spread out, hemming Ellie and Peter in, forcing them to move. "You," the leader said, pointing directly at Ellie. "Come with us, alone." Bruno's body tensed further, a deep snarl rolling from his chest. His eyes blazed, his growl not just a threat, but a declaration. He would not let them take her without a fight. Ellie didn't hesitate. She knelt, wrapping her arms around Bruno's head, whispering into his ear. Her voice meant only for him. "Stay with me, Bruno. No matter what." Bruno whined softly, his nose brushing her cheek. A vow. Peter scanned the cave in a quick, sharp glance, searching for an escape route or a chance to counterattack. But they were outnumbered, outflanked. Ellie was pushed ahead, Peter close behind. Bruno stayed glued to her side, each heavy step brimming with fierce protectiveness. The rocky corridor narrowed, Peter's flashlight catching slick patches of water across the stone floor, evidence of an underground stream close by. The tall man loomed near Ellie, his lips curling into a cold smirk. "Michael Carter disturbed some very powerful people," he said, his voice carrying no hint of remorse. "When he found that mineral vein, he should have stayed quiet. Instead, he wanted to reveal everything. Throw away a multi-billion-dollar opportunity." Ellie stayed silent, her eyes locked on Bruno's form, trusting each steady step of the shepherd. The man's voice sliced the thick, heavy air. "We kept him here, to make sure no one else would discover the truth. And if you're smart, you'll stay silent too." Bruno edged forward, his solid shoulder shielding Ellie from the man's looming presence. Every move he made was a vow that he would not allow harm to come to her as long as he drew breath. Peter's fists clenched at his sides, his mind racing. And Ellie knew they wouldn't simply be led away like lambs to the slaughter. In the darkness, amid the heavy breathing and the steady dripping of water, Bruno lifted his head and drew in a deep breath through his nose. His ears pricked even higher, and his entire body coiled tight like a spring ready to unleash. Ellie sensed it instantly. Bruno had detected something, an opportunity, a crack in the tight control of their enemies. And she knew the moment to act was fast approaching. Amid the shadowed cliffs, among cold, ruthless calculations, the flame of hope had not yet been extinguished. It lived still, burning bright in the fierce eyes of a shepherd dog, the silent gatekeeper of love and an unbreakable loyalty that would never, ever surrender. In that split second, when danger loomed like a blade against their throats, Bruno acted. No command, no signal needed. The shepherd surged forward, his powerful body slicing through the air like a gust of wind, carrying all the love and loyalty he had harbored in his heart over 4 long years. A thunderous bark erupted from Bruno's mouth, powerful and fierce, an unshakable declaration that he would protect Ellie at all costs. Bruno lunged straight at the towering man who was closing in on Ellie. The collision was so forceful that the man staggered, lost his balance, and was hurled against the rock wall. The gun hidden under his coat slipped from his grasp and clattered onto the stone floor with a cold, metallic clang. Peter, guided by the instincts of a seasoned officer, seized the opportunity. He rushed forward, snatched up the fallen gun, and spun around, shoving one of the remaining attackers hard into the rock wall, knocking the wind out of him as he crashed onto the icy cave floor. In that chaotic moment, Ellie, her heart trembling but her mind razor-sharp, pulled the rescue whistle from her collar and blew a long, piercing note. The sharp sound tore through the heavy air of the cavern, bouncing off the stone walls in a wave of echoing alarms. Bruno didn't stop after his first attack. Spinning around with a growl, he charged at the second man who was just drawing a knife. With the agility of a warrior honed by instinct, Bruno leaped up, using all his strength to strike the arm wielding the weapon. The knife flew from the attacker's hand, clattering far away onto the stone floor. The man stumbled back, reeling in pain and shock, a flash of panic flickering in his eyes. Peter delivered a clean punch to the jaw of a third man who was reaching for a gun, knocking him flat. Without wasting a second, he bound the man's wrists with a vine rope he had picked up earlier from the base camp. After blowing the whistle again, Ellie felt a faint tremor under her feet, as if the entire mountain was holding its breath, listening to her desperate call for help. Bruno stood firmly in front of her, his body a living barricade. His breathing was heavy and fast, but his eyes remained clear and bright, and his ears perked up, alert to every sound. One of the attackers, realizing the tide had turned against them, panicked and fled deeper into the cave. Peter raised his gun to aim, but Ellie quickly placed a hand on his arm and shook her head. "We're not hunting them," she said, her voice steadier than ever. "We're finding Michael." Peter understood. They couldn't afford distractions. Michael's life could be hanging by a thread, counting down by the second. In the distance, the sound of footsteps and loudspeakers grew louder. The rescue team had heard Ellie's signal. They were coming. Ellie knelt down and wrapped her arms around Bruno, burying her face in his soaked fur, her tears mixing with the earthy scent of rock and the warm breath of a living being who had never abandoned her, never stopped believing in her, not even for a heartbeat. "You are the bravest dog," Ellie whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you, Bruno." Bruno wagged his tail gently and nuzzled his head against Ellie's chest, as if to say he would stay. He would keep fighting until she was safe, until their small family was whole again. Peter stepped forward, placing a steady hand on Ellie's shoulder, his eyes heavy but warm. "We're not done yet," he said, his voice carrying a firm, unbreakable resolve. Ellie nodded, clutching the rescue whistle tightly in her hand like a silent promise to herself. Bruno stepped ahead, his keen eyes scanning the darkness, stopping at a narrow, pitch-black passage deeper into the cavern. He took a long sniff, catching the faint, invisible trails, then barked softly. He had found something. Without hesitation, Ellie grabbed her backpack, Peter checked his weapon, and the three of them rushed after Bruno. Ahead lay dense darkness, and ahead lay unknown dangers. But in each of their hearts, a fierce flame of hope burned brighter than ever, lit by love, loyalty, and the strength of an indomitable dog named Bruno. The thick darkness of the mountain's core became no more than a thin veil as beams of flashlight pierced through it, as the sound of pounding footsteps echoed, and the blaring loudspeakers shattered the heavy silence that had smothered the place for too long. Bruno was the first to halt, his ears standing tall, his whole body tensed like a drawn bow. At the same time, Ellie and Peter froze, their eyes fixed on the bend ahead where the light was growing stronger by the second. From two narrow stone corridors, rescue workers and federal agents clad in black uniforms surged forward like a powerful tidal wave. Peter immediately raised his hand to signal, his sharp eyes commanding the formation. He stepped up, his voice deep and firm, reverberating through the cave. "Rescue team, move forward. FBI split into two wings, blocking all exits. Do not let anyone escape." The criminals, caught off guard by the swift raid, panicked and fell into disarray. Some tried to run, but faced with the blinding lights and overwhelming force of justice, they were quickly cornered and subdued. The tall man, the one who had threatened Ellie earlier, frantically drew a gun from his belt. But in an instant, an FBI agent knocked it from his hand with a precise kick to his wrist. The gun spun across the stone floor and lay still under the glaring flashlights. Bruno, with his sharp instincts, kept close to the movements. He dashed toward one man trying to sneak into the shadows, barking sharply and startling him into freezing, giving a rescuer the perfect chance to tackle and restrain him. Ellie stood at the center of the brief chaos, her hand gripping her backpack strap tightly, her heart pounding wildly, not just from fear, but from the overwhelming disbelief that it was finally ending. In the bright flood of flashlights, Ellie could see each face of the tireless comrades around her. Peter, his face glistening with sweat, but his eyes still shining with unshakable resolve. The FBI agents systematically surrounded, apprehended, and handcuffed the very men who had cast darkness over her life for the past 4 years. Bruno turned his head to look at Ellie, his tongue lolling as he panted, but his bright eyes radiated unwavering trust. As the cold handcuffs snapped shut on the wrists of the guilty, as each villain was forced down onto the freezing stone floor, Ellie felt her knees give way. She dropped down and threw her arms around Bruno, feeling the strong, rapid heartbeat beneath his soaked and filthy fur. "You brought us here, Bruno," Ellie whispered into his ear, her voice choked with emotion. "You never gave up." Bruno pressed his head against her chest, his cold nose brushing her heated skin, a silent reply, full of love. Peter stepped closer, the flashlight swinging in his hand, illuminating each face, each smear of blood, each drop of sweat on the faces of the newly captured. He exhaled a long breath as if releasing a weight he had carried in his heart for many years. "The rescue team will lead us out," Peter said, his hand firm on Ellie's shoulder. "But first we have one more thing to do. We have to find Michael." Ellie stood up, her eyes shining through her tears, clutching her backpack to her chest. Beside her, Bruno shook off his soaked fur, sending tiny droplets sparkling in the flashlight beams. Without needing a command, Bruno stepped forward, leading the way with his unfailing instinct. His tail raised high, his strong legs stepping surely over the slippery stone, he pressed deeper into the cave where Michael awaited in the darkness, where this story would find its ending. Ellie, Peter, and their comrades followed Bruno's trail. The howling wind outside the stone walls sounded like the final sigh of the storm just past, leaving behind those who now clung tightly to one another with all the trust, love, and loyalty they had never once let go. Bruno came to an abrupt halt in the cold depths of the cave. His ears stood straight, his whole body stretched tight like a taut string ready to sing its first note. Ellie instinctively stopped as well, her hand clenching the strap of her backpack, her heartbeat pounding so loudly it seemed to echo through her chest. Peter's flashlight swept across the rough, mottled stone walls. In the trembling beam, a small, frail figure emerged from the shadows. Michael. Ellie froze, her eyes widened, and her lips quivered without forming words. The familiar features, though now gaunt and worn, were unmistakable. He leaned heavily on a walking stick, his steps slow and weary, but when he lifted his gaze, his eyes shone like a flame, rekindled after a great storm. The distance between them was only a few dozen steps, but in that moment it seemed as if all barriers of time and space melted away, leaving only the vibrant presence of two souls who had never stopped searching for each other. Ellie let her backpack fall to the stone floor. Her legs moved on their own, propelled by the call of her heart, rushing forward without hesitation. Bruno ran beside her, his strong body stretched forward like an arrow leading the charge, his tail whipping the air, casting fleeting shadows under the trembling flashlight beams. Michael staggered, dropping his stick. His arms reached out, trembling but determined. He collapsed to his knees on the damp, cold stone just as Ellie threw herself into his arms, clutching him as if letting go would cause everything to disappear. They held each other tightly, surrounded by the biting cold, the distant murmurs of the cave, and a torrent of tears they could no longer hold back. Michael pressed his forehead against Ellie's shoulder, his body trembling, not from the cold, but from overwhelming emotion, from the realization that his final, fragile hope had been fulfilled. "I'm here," Michael whispered, his voice breaking with ragged breaths. "I always believed you would find me." Ellie didn't reply. She only clung tighter to him, tears streaming down her face, washing away every pain, every fear, leaving only boundless, overwhelming joy. She listened to the fragile but resilient beat of his heart beneath the worn coat, a living proof that he had survived, that he had waited for her. Bruno circled them, his nose gently nudging Michael's hand, his body pulsing with life. He let out a soft whine, a tiny, choked sound full of unspeakable happiness. Michael loosened his grip on Ellie just enough to reach down, his trembling fingers stroking Bruno's thick fur, clinging to the dog with all the unspoken gratitude in his heart. "Good boy," Michael said hoarsely. "You didn't give up. You saved us all." Bruno gently licked the back of his hand, a tender gesture like warm water easing old wounds. Peter stood quietly behind them, his flashlight flickering, his face weighed down with emotion. He had witnessed many reunions in his lifetime, but never one so heavy, so profound as this. Deep in the earth, under the dim, unwavering light of faith and loyalty. Ellie gently brushed Michael's tousled hair, feeling the fragile breath of life in every tremor of his chest. She whispered, her voice trembling as if speaking too loudly might shatter the moment like morning mist under the sun. "I found you, Michael. Bruno and I found you." Michael rested his head against her shoulder, his tears soaking into the fabric of her jacket. His body shook with quiet sobs, cries that had been locked away for 4 endless years, now finally breaking free. Bruno sat close beside them, his watchful eyes following every movement. In Bruno's gaze, there was no fear, no threat, only the profound peace of a completed mission, of a love that never wavered. Far off, the footsteps of the rescue team echoed faintly, flashlights clinking against the stone, distant voices calling out. But Ellie heard only one sound, the strong, racing heartbeat under the battered coat in her arms. She didn't know how long it would be before the sun rose above them, but she knew, in her heart, that the light had already returned. Bruno, wagging his tail gently in time with her breathing, had waited for this moment through 4 long years. And now, with his small family reunited, he simply lowered his head and pressed his nose into Ellie's hand. A silent, sacred welcome beneath the earth, where love had conquered darkness and blazed brighter than ever. Bruno remained by their side, his proud little body standing as a steadfast shield in a world that still trembled around the 2 humans locked in their embrace. His eyes shone under the dim flashlight, reflecting a quiet joy, a pride too deep for words. Michael leaned lightly against Ellie, his legs shaking from exhaustion, but his eyes more determined than ever. He gently stroked Bruno's head, his thin fingers trembling slightly, as if afraid he might wake from a dream. "You know, Ellie," Michael said, his voice rough like the wind through stone hollows, but each word heavy with emotion. "Bruno was never just a stray dog. He's always been my closest friend." Ellie fell silent, her gaze fixed on Bruno. Her hand unconsciously stroked his dirt-matted fur, feeling for the steady, patient heartbeat that had led her here. Michael carefully shifted closer to the rock wall, pulling Bruno even closer to him, his voice breaking with every breath. "That day," he began, his eyes gazing far off into memory, "when I discovered the geological signs. I knew I had found something more valuable than anything those corporations had ever dreamed of." He lowered his head, clutching Ellie's hand like clinging to the last warmth he could trust. "They didn't want the discovery made public. They decided to keep me quiet. They came for me during a heavy storm when it was just me and Bruno camping in the forest. They attacked without warning. I couldn't fight them off, but Bruno didn't back down." Michael's voice broke, his eyes filling with emotion as he looked at Bruno. He fought. He barked into the night. He hurled himself at them with everything he had. During the chaos, Bruno bit through the ropes binding me. I screamed at him to run to find help, to find a way to save me. Bruno whined softly, as if recalling the long, harrowing journey through rain, danger, and loneliness he had endured. Michael bent down, cradling Bruno's head in his trembling arms, his voice cracking under the weight of emotion. Bruno escaped. But instead of fleeing, he stayed in the mountains for 4 years. He wandered, watched every search party, guided rescuers, hoping someone would finally understand the signs he left behind. Ellie couldn't hold back anymore. Tears spilled over her burning cheeks. She knelt, throwing her arms around Bruno, burying her face in the thick, wild fur that still carried the scent of earth and wilderness. "I heard him," Ellie whispered, her voice breaking between sobs. "Bruno led me here." Michael nodded, his eyes shining with an unbreakable belief. "Only when Bruno found you," he said. "Only then did he truly believe someone had enough patience, enough love, to follow those fragile traces to the end." Bruno lifted his gaze to them both, his eyes deep and unwavering, a mirror of silent courage, loyalty, and love gathered over 4 endless years. Peter stood a short distance away, silently honoring the sacred moment. He slowly removed his hat and bowed his head. A quiet salute to the small but mighty dog, a warrior who had fought tirelessly for a cause far greater than himself, for love and life. The rescue team stood ready. Stretchers and medical equipment were prepared, their flashlights flickering, signaling that they could move at any moment. But for now, time seemed frozen, held in the invisible bonds of an unbreakable trust. Ellie clutched Bruno close, whispering through tears and broken laughter. "We're going home, Bruno. Our family will never be apart again." Bruno wagged his tail, a simple gesture filled with strength. He stood up, stepping forward once more, as he had done countless times before. Michael leaned into Ellie, his gaze burning with renewed hope as he watched Bruno move steadily toward the faint glimmer of light ahead. Darkness still surrounded them. The danger was not yet over, but within their hearts a gentle light had taken root, a light that could never be extinguished. Because they had found each other. Because Bruno had never abandoned them. Not even once. Pale sunlight filtered through the dense canopy, casting dappled patches of light on the damp ground. In that space, Bruno sat close beside Michael, his ears standing tall, his sharp eyes watching every movement around him, as if he understood that the battle was far from over. Michael leaned against Ellie, his body frail after years of captivity, but in his gray-blue eyes, an indomitable fire still smoldered. In Peter's hand was a small USB drive, a fragile piece of evidence carrying the colossal truth that for 4 long years the perpetrators had desperately tried to bury. Under the fading, yellowed leaves, a simple folding table had been set up. An FBI technician carefully inserted the USB into a laptop. The pale blue screen flickered under the shadows, reflected in the tense, anxious eyes of everyone gathered around. Ellie clutched Michael's hand tightly, her breath catching with each passing second. Beside her, Bruno sat as still as a statue, his tail flicking only slightly each time the keyboard clicked. The first files appeared. Images of vast mineral veins deep within the mountain, schematics of underground extraction networks, designs for illegal facilities, all meticulously documented in chilling detail. Scientific notes and internal reports filled with coded language that barely veiled the greed and cruelty beneath. Ellie felt every cell in her body tremble. The scattered pieces of a monstrous puzzle that had haunted them for 4 years were slowly coming together before her eyes, clear, ruthless, undeniable. Bruno rested his head on her knee, his eyes reflecting a distant sadness, as if he, too, remembered the lonely, endless days wandering through the mountains, silently seeking a way to bring the truth into the light. Then, the encrypted file was unlocked. A recording began to play, heavy with the low, gravelly tones of secret meetings. "We must control that area. Remove anyone who might cause trouble. Geologist Carter has found undocumented mineral veins. If he talks, the entire project collapses. Keep him contained. No one must know. Seal off the area. Erase all traces if necessary." Ellie covered her mouth, a strangled sob escaping her. Michael squeezed her hand tightly, his knuckles turning white from the force of it. Peter stood behind them, his face carved into stone. He signaled to the agents, his voice lower and colder than the chilling forest winds. "We have enough evidence. Issue the arrest orders immediately." The agents swiftly divided tasks, contacting crime control units in the city. The ones behind the dark conspiracy, those who had heartlessly imprisoned Michael, those who tried to smother the truth for dirty profits, had nowhere left to run. Bruno never took his eyes off the screen, his ears tilting towards the damning voices emanating from the laptop. His posture was unwavering, like a silent guardian witnessing justice being served. Peter bent down and placed a gentle hand on Bruno's head, a silent but deeply respectful gesture. "Thanks to you," he whispered, "the truth has come to light." Bruno wagged his tail softly, his eyes still filled with unbreakable resolve. At that moment, Ellie realized that Bruno was not just Michael's companion, not just the brave dog who saved them. He was a living witness to the best of what loyalty and love could achieve. An agent approached Peter and reported that the arrest orders had been authorized. The takedown teams were already moving to sweep away the deeply rooted criminal network that had plagued them for years. Ellie knelt before Bruno, wrapping her trembling arms around him. "You did it, Bruno," she whispered, her tears falling into his thick, soft fur. "You protected the truth. You protected our family." Bruno folded his ears back, his eyes gleaming under the scattered sunlight, like a small star finally rekindled after a long, dark storm. The data from the USB continued to download, each line piercing through the darkness that had shrouded the last 4 years. Every piece of evidence brought them closer to justice, a clarion call against the insatiable greed that had almost cost Michael his life. And at the heart of it all, Bruno sat quietly yet steadfastly, a living monument to patience and loyalty, proving that even a small, determined heart could change the world. In the late afternoon, sunlight streamed through Ellie's window, spreading like a soft golden carpet across the simple living room, a room once filled with footprints of love and memory. Outside the porch, a gentle breeze stirred the wildflowers, and the fresh scent of rain-drenched earth lingered in the cool air. Michael rested in an old armchair beside the fireplace, a thin woolen blanket draped around him, his breathing steady and his face more peaceful than it had been in 4 long years. At his feet, Bruno lay curled up, his head resting lightly on Michael's foot, his eyes closed but his ears perked, ready to spring to life at the slightest movement from his master. Nearby, Ellie sat with a stack of old papers in her lap, Michael's journals, written during his years of captivity deep within the mountain's heart. His handwriting, familiar yet hurried, sprawled across each page, sometimes shaky, but every word soaked in unyielding love and unwavering hope. She trembled as she opened the first page. "Today is the first day of my captivity. Outside the rain is pouring. I don't know how long I'll survive, but if anyone reads this, please tell Ellie that I love her with all I have, every day, every moment, and forever." Silent tears spilled down Ellie's face, blurring the ink already smudged by rain and time. Bruno stirred slightly, lifting his head to look at her with bright eyes, as if he too remembered those long, harrowing days, wandering the mountains with only one hope, to find someone who could understand the signs he left behind. Ellie smiled through her tears, reaching out to gently stroke Bruno's head, whispering a wordless thank you. She continued reading. The pages chronicled Michael's struggle to survive, finding safe water using his geological knowledge, dodging patrols, clinging to hope with memories of her smile, of their evenings on the porch, of the bitter coffee she used to make him every morning. Some pages bore only a single, hastily scrawled line, repeated like a prayer. "I love you. I believe you'll find me." Bruno edged closer, his warm nose nudging Ellie's arm. She looked up and saw his eyes shining under the twilight, filled with silent understanding and unwavering faith. Suddenly, Ellie found another page, where Michael's writing was steadier, clearer, as if he had summoned all his courage to record something vital. "Bruno, our faithful friend. I've seen him return, again and again, trailing behind search parties, watching hikers, leaving signs no one understood. I'm writing this because I believe Bruno will not give up. I believe that someday, thanks to Bruno, Ellie will find her way to me." Ellie clutched the papers to her chest, her heart tightening painfully. She bent down, hugging Bruno tightly, pressing her cheek into his weathered, earth-scented fur, letting her tears soak into his coat like a silent prayer of gratitude. Bruno whined softly, nudging her wrist as if to comfort her, as if to say that all he had endured, all the wounds, all the years of loneliness, were worth it for this moment of reunion. By the fireplace, Michael opened his eyes. He saw Ellie embracing Bruno, crying silently, and Bruno patiently remaining by her side, a steadfast pillar for them both. He smiled weakly and reached out his hand to call them over. Ellie stood up, guiding Bruno with her. They sat down beside Michael, arms entwined, hearts beating in unison, listening to the soft breeze outside the porch, listening to the quiet mending of a world once torn by darkness and pain. There were still many journal pages left, and Michael's story was far from finished. But Ellie knew that every word would forever bind them together, like immortal love, like the undying loyalty Bruno had silently carried in his brave, small heart. The morning sky on the day of the trial wore a dull gray cloak. Clouds drifted lazily over the old county courthouse, where today, more than a case would be judged. It was a trial of truth, loyalty, and human dignity. Ellie gripped Michael's hand tightly as they climbed the cold stone steps leading inside. Bruno walked close beside them, his tail swaying gently with each step, his sturdy form a steadfast barrier between Michael and the outside world. Inside the courtroom, everything seemed to slow down. The long wooden benches were packed, mostly with townsfolk, people who once knew Michael as a kind, dedicated scientist, now gathered to witness justice find its way home. On the judge's bench, the silver-haired man adjusted his glasses before signaling the clerk to begin. The air was thick with emotion, every breath carrying the silent resonance of hearts swelling with feeling. Michael rose slowly from his seat, making his way to the witness stand. Bruno followed silently, his steps steady beside him. When Michael sat down, Bruno curled up at his feet, resting his head lightly on the worn boots Michael used to wear on long expeditions. Ellie sat in the front row, her heart pounding so loudly it seemed to drown out every other sound. Beside her, Peter sat in silence, his aged hands clenched tightly, his gaze locked onto the young man preparing to expose the darkness he had survived. When the prosecutor asked Michael to recount his story, a heavy hush fell over the room. Michael lifted his head, his eyes calm but burning with unwavering belief. He began to speak about the early days of his research, about discovering the rare minerals deep within Mount Adara, about the secret surveys and the greedy eyes of those who wished to bury the truth. He spoke about his research project, about the discovery of rare minerals buried deep within Mount Adara, about the secret surveys, and about the greedy eyes of those who would stop at nothing to keep the truth hidden. He recounted the night of the attack, the growls of Bruno cutting through the freezing rain, and the moment he had no choice but to order Bruno to flee, entrusting his only hope to the small, loyal four paws he loved so dearly. A soft sob echoed from somewhere in the back of the room. Ellie clasped her hands together, her tears welling up but never falling, instead soaking inwardly into her very breath. Bruno remained motionless at Michael's feet, his warm brown eyes gazing up at his master's face with an expression of quiet reassurance. His tail gave a gentle wag whenever Michael spoke of him, of the years Bruno spent silently trailing behind rescue teams, desperately trying to signal the existence of the man he would not abandon, of the loyalty that had never faded even through the coldest stones and deepest darkness. When Michael finished his testimony, the courtroom sank into a deep, profound silence. Bruno shifted slightly, lifting his head to gently lick Michael's hand. A simple gesture, yet steeped in a shared understanding, like a silent punctuation mark at the end of a quiet, heroic ballad. Moments later, the judge broke the silence with a heavy strike of his gavel. His voice, hoarse yet commanding, reminded everyone that loyalty, courage, and truth would always find a way to shine through, no matter the cowardly efforts to suppress them. When the defense attorney tried to cross-examine Michael, their voice sharp and biting like a dull knife tearing through the air, Michael remained composed. Each of his answers was clear and articulate, built not only on truth, but also carried by a love and a memory that nothing could erase. Bruno never left Michael's side. Throughout the trial, he seemed to transform into an inseparable part of the testimony, a living witness, a silent emblem of patience and unwavering faith. Finally, when the trial came to a close, when the USB evidence had been laid bare, when Michael's testimony and that of the other witnesses wove together an undeniable portrait of wrongdoing, Ellie felt as though she were breathing again, for the first time in 4 long, harrowing years. She bent down and hugged Bruno tightly as they left the courthouse under the radiant afternoon sun. That embrace was not only a thank you, it was a silent tribute to the small, steadfast heart that had patiently led them through the darkness back into the light. At the foot of the stone steps, Michael paused. He bent down and wrapped his arms around Bruno, his eyes shimmering under the golden light of the setting sun. "We did it," he whispered, and in the breeze that stirred the ancient trees, it seemed as though nature itself bowed gently in quiet applause. The old wooden gate creaked softly as Ellie pushed it open, stepping into the front yard, still covered in green moss after so many years of abandonment. Michael followed close behind her, leaning lightly on the wooden cane Peter had given him, his very first gift upon returning home. And between them, Bruno walked with steady, confident steps, his tail wagging gently like the breath of a new day. The last spring breeze swept past, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and late-blooming wildflowers. Ellie took a deep breath, then turned to look at Michael, her eyes sparkling with joy and the eager excitement of a child harboring a beautiful secret. "We're going to make a garden," she said softly, her voice warm as the morning sun. "A garden for hope, for the dreams we almost lost." Michael smiled, a light, misty smile, yet weighted with deep meaning. He nodded, and together they gazed out at the patch of land in front of the porch, where wild grass had overgrown but hints of resilient life still peeked through. Bruno barked softly, as if agreeing. He bounded forward, scratching at the grass, his nose sniffing the soil carefully, as if testing its readiness to become the new home for seeds of hope. Ellie knelt, her fingers threading through the earth, feeling its coolness and moisture seep between them. Michael knelt beside her, placing his hand atop hers, a gentle squeeze, a promise without words. That entire afternoon, they worked together, slowly but patiently. Michael pulled out the weeds, Ellie turned over the soil, and Bruno bustled around them, occasionally leaping up as if urging them to hurry, for the sun was dipping lower and the sky was blushing a soft golden hue. By the time the sun had melted into a thin line at the horizon, Ellie and Michael stood up, wiping the sweat from their brows with their sleeves, admiring their first accomplishment. A small patch of earth, cleared and ready, the soft furrows waiting for seeds to be sown. Michael pulled out a rough wooden sign he had secretly crafted in the workshop behind the house. He carefully planted it in the center of the garden. The freshly carved letters were still raw, but every stroke was filled with emotion. Hope Garden, where hearts never give up. Ellie reached out and gently traced the letters with her fingers, as if trying to etch them into her heart forever. Bruno sat beside them, his attentive eyes following their every move, his tail wagging slowly in the brilliant golden light. When Ellie and Michael began planting the first seeds, they did so with a simple, reverent solemnity. Each lavender sprout, each tiny rosebud, each little white daisy pressed into the earth was a silent prayer. For new life, for wounds to heal, for peaceful days yet to come. Bruno moved quietly around the garden, touching his nose to each spot where a seed was buried, as if blessing each tiny life. When the last furrow was filled, the sky had deepened into a rich violet. Ellie sat down on the ground, leaning her back against Michael's chest, while Bruno curled around them, his warm, sturdy body a living blanket, guarding all their still tender wounds. At that moment, the entire world seemed to shrink to just 3 hearts beating together. 3 souls once torn apart, but now stitched back together by invisible threads of love and hope. Michael leaned down and whispered into Ellie's ear, his voice soft as the cool breeze from the forest behind the house. "We'll make this garden bloom, Ellie, just like Bruno lit up our lives once more." Ellie smiled, a smile that carried everything she couldn't put into words. She hugged Bruno tightly, burying her face in his soft fur, whispering a thank you that needed no reply. Bruno lifted his head, his eyes sparkling in the faint light of the stars just beginning to emerge at the rim of the sky. And in those eyes, Ellie saw a silent but powerful promise. No matter what tomorrow might bring, he would always be there, the quiet guardian of hope. The next morning, the Hope Garden was bathed in golden sunlight. Tiny seedlings, just breaking through the surface of the soil, sparkled with dew still clinging to their leaves. Ellie opened the window, letting the first rays of sunshine flood the little house, carrying with them the gentle scent of damp earth and wildflowers. Michael sat at the wooden table by the window. In front of him lay a brand-new notebook, its blank pages inviting the start of a new journey. At his feet, Bruno lay curled up, his head resting on Michael's foot, his breathing steady and warm, a silent drumbeat welcoming the peaceful morning. Ellie brewed 2 cups of coffee, a long-forgotten routine now revived with a happiness that infused every movement. She placed 1 cup before Michael and sat down beside him, her hand brushing lightly against his, a silent connection deeper than any words. Michael lifted his head, and in his eyes, Ellie saw a spark of eagerness she hadn't seen in a long time. He opened the notebook, his pen gliding across the page, inscribing the first lines of this new chapter in his life. He wrote about the strange mineral discovered deep within Mount Adara, about a crystalline structure unlike anything documented in any scientific record, a substance with a miraculous ability to store energy, with the potential to transform the future of green technology. But more than that, he wrote about the journey of survival, about the days and nights teetering on the edge of despair, and about the silent force that had carried him through it all. In this new journal, Bruno was not merely a witness, he was a guiding soul, a small, enduring flame that burned through 4 long years of darkness until it finally blazed into the light that led them home. Ellie propped her chin in her hand, watching Michael write, her heart swelling with quiet, tender pride. She knew better than anyone that every word he penned today was not just part of a scientific record. It was a resurrection, a declaration that they had reclaimed their right to live, to love, and to dream. As the sun climbed higher, Michael stood up, pulling on the pale shirt that Ellie loved so much. He was preparing to return to the local university where he once taught, a place he once feared would be nothing more than a memory. Today, he would return not just as a scientist, but as a man bearing a story of courage, of patience, and of the miracles that love and loyalty could create. Bruno rose at the same moment as Michael, his sturdy body moving gracefully, a faithful shadow never far behind. Ellie smiled as she noticed the new light blue scarf she had hand-stitched for Bruno, with a small embroidered line she knew would remind everyone of him. Hope Keeper, the guardian of hope. Bruno lifted his head proudly, the scarf fluttering gently in the breeze like a tiny flag. When Michael left the house, Ellie stood on the porch, holding a bouquet of lavender freshly picked from the Hope Garden. Bruno strode alongside Michael, every step firm and sure, like the strong, steady heartbeat of a world being reborn. Down the dusty red path leading to town, the local townspeople paused to watch them pass, their gazes filled with respect and affection, following the man and his brave dog. No words were needed. Everyone understood they were witnessing the most beautiful story their little village had ever known. And in the soft morning light, Ellie stood there, cradling the bouquet of lavender, her eyes following the two figures fading into the distance. Her heart brimmed with an unshakable faith that the days ahead would no longer be filled with loss, but with seasons of endless blooming, born from seeds of love, faith, and unbreakable loyalty. That afternoon, as the sun began pouring its final golden rays over the Adira forest, Ellie packed a basket with fresh bread and a few small flasks of water, while Michael carried an old checkered blanket they used to spread out whenever they sat together in nature. At the door, Bruno stood ready, his blue scarf embroidered with Hope Keeper, fluttering slightly as he wagged his tail with quiet excitement, as if he already knew that this evening would be a memory worth keeping. Together, they left the little house, passing through the Hope Garden, where the first flowers had just begun to bloom. Bruno led the way, his firm steps leaving tiny prints in the soft dirt, tracing a path made of loyalty and endless faith. The golden sunset bathed the fields ahead, the tall grass whispering in the wind, carrying the sweet scent of a land reborn after the storm. Ellie reached for Michael's hand, feeling the warmth of his touch spread through her like a heartbeat. Steady, familiar, and deeply in sync like two souls finally reunited after so long adrift. Bruno darted around them, occasionally stopping to look up with bright, gleaming eyes, as if checking to make sure they were still there, still safe, still walking together on a road woven with love. They stopped beneath an ancient oak tree, from where they could gaze down at the lush green valley below. Michael spread the blanket out, while Ellie unpacked the soft loaves of bread from the basket. Bruno stretched out beside them, his pink tongue lolling slightly, his eyes flooded with contentment. They ate a simple dinner under the fading light of the sky, quietly sharing little stories, tiny dreams, and plans for a future they had once feared they might never reach. As the sun melted into a thin line of fire on the horizon, Ellie rested her head on Michael's shoulder, her eyes half closed, her heart open wide enough to embrace the entire world. She whispered, her voice as soft as the breeze skimming through the branches. "Maybe Bruno is the bravest explorer among us all." Michael smiled, his gaze following the shape of Bruno as he wandered around, gently touching his nose to the ground, marking the land like a devoted guardian of hope. "I think you're right," Michael murmured back, giving Ellie's shoulder a gentle squeeze as if imprinting this sacred moment into his very soul. Bruno turned to look at them, his ears perking as he listened to the rhythm of their breathing, the soft heartbeat between two people he had guarded so patiently for 4 long years. In his deep brown eyes, Ellie saw the resilience of the earth, the vastness of the sky, and the steadfast loyalty that had never once wavered. The sunset deepened, painting the sky crimson, casting golden streaks over Ellie's tawny hair, over the worn shoulders of Michael's shirt, and over Bruno's soft fur, making him seem part of the glowing halo they had fought so long to reclaim. Amid the gentle space of that evening, Ellie closed her eyes, listening to the wind, to the whispering grass, and to the sound of her own heart breaking open in silent gratitude. "Love never truly disappears," she thought. "It only hides, waiting for us to find it again, just as Bruno had found them, through endless mists, darkness, and danger." And as they stood up and made their way back along the small path leading home, to the little house and the Hope Garden, Bruno walked beside them, every step firm and sure, a soft reminder that life, no matter how withered it once seemed, could always bloom again, nourished by loyalty and unwavering faith. Night fell softly over Hope Garden, like a thin veil of silk draped across the land. The newly blooming lavender swayed gently in the cool breeze, releasing a tender fragrance that drifted through the air. Ellie, Michael, and Bruno sat together on the wooden steps, silently gazing up at the vast, starlit sky. Without a single word, they felt the fullness of the moment, as if all the pain, all the losses they had once endured, had been washed clean under the gentle light of the night. Michael stroked the soft fur on Bruno's head, his hand warm and steady, speaking a silent language Bruno seemed to understand perfectly. The dog closed his eyes, his moist nose nudging Michael's palm in a gesture so gentle, yet deeper than any spoken promise. Ellie watched them, her heart wrapped in a new kind of light, gentle, enduring. She thought back to the long, hopeless years, the days spent searching through the void, clinging to fragile threads of hope. And now, here she was, touching the miracle she had once only dared to dream of. "I used to think," Ellie whispered hesitantly, as if afraid to disturb the fragile peace, "that science could explain everything. But maybe some miracles aren't meant to be explained at all." Michael smiled, his eyes shining under the canopy of stars. He reached for her hand, squeezing it gently, pouring all his understanding into that one touch. "I used to believe that too," Michael murmured, his voice deep and steady like the whisper of the earth itself. "But Bruno taught me something else. His loyalty, his unconditional love, it saved us. Not because he understood physics or survival theories, but because he believed. With his whole heart." Ellie leaned down and hugged Bruno tightly. He remained still, gently pushing his warm nose into her embrace, answering her with a simple yet profound affection. Bruno needed no reason to come back to them. He needed no proof to trust, no promises to remain loyal. He simply loved with everything he had. And that had turned him into the invisible thread that bound lives once thought forever lost. They sat there together, letting the night wind caress their hair and clothes, letting time pass slowly, as if even the universe itself was pausing to honor the resilience of love and loyalty. Michael looked up at the sky, his gaze drifting over the countless shimmering stars. He thought of all the scientific theories he had studied, all the equations and formulas he once believed could explain everything. But here, now, at this moment, he knew. No theory, no formula could ever describe the miracle woven into every breath they shared. The greatest miracles, he thought, cannot be seen through a microscope, cannot be measured by machines, and cannot be trapped within the sterile walls of experiments. They can only be felt, in steady heartbeats, in silent embraces, in eyes that wait and never give up. Bruno shifted slightly, lifting his clear eyes towards the heavens, as if he too was listening to these silent musings. Ellie placed her hand gently on Bruno's back, feeling the warm, steady life that had journeyed with them across all those long, aching years. She knew that whatever challenges the future might bring, as long as love, trust, and loyalty lived in their hearts, they would overcome anything. She closed her eyes, letting the night breeze brush against her face, letting her heart open wide to the quiet miracles without needing to understand them. Some mysteries, she whispered to herself, are not meant to be analyzed. They are meant to be believed. And Bruno's loyalty, the love between her and Michael, the faith in brighter days ahead, they were the simplest, yet the most powerful miracles of all. As the stars began to fade, making way for the first light of dawn, Ellie, Michael, and Bruno left the porch together, walking along the old trail that led towards the Adara forest. There was no longer the urgency of desperate searches, no longer the heavy steps weighed down by loss. Today, they walked with complete tranquility, as if even the pebbles beneath their feet were rejoicing with each light, steady stride. Bruno ran ahead, his movements strong and full of life. The blue scarf embroidered with Hope Keeper fluttered in the early morning breeze, like a proud little flag leading the way for the family. From time to time, he stopped and turned to look back at them, his eyes shining with a clear, pure light, as if making sure they were still there, still together, still whole. Ellie clasped Michael's hand, her palm fitting perfectly into his, both soft and steady. Their eyes met for a brief, profound moment, and in that glance, there were no remnants of lost time or pain, only the pure presence of love. They passed through dew-drenched meadows, babbling brooks, and ancient trees that had witnessed countless seasons of falling and budding leaves. Everything around them seemed to sing a gentle chorus, welcoming back hearts that had finally found their way home after so many long, arduous years. Bruno led them to a small clearing, where the early morning sun poured across the soft grass. He lay down in the center of the clearing, lifting his head high, his brown eyes shining toward Ellie and Michael, as if to say, "This is the place. This is where new beginnings bloom, free from sorrow and pain." Ellie sat down beside Bruno, gently stroking his thick, warm fur, feeling every steady breath, every determined heartbeat that had never once faltered through their long journey. Michael sat down across from them, wrapping his arms around Ellie and Bruno, an embrace that was not just shelter, but a silent vow that from this moment onward, they would never lose each other again. At that moment, Ellie thought, some journeys take a lifetime to complete. Some miracles aren't born of magic or groundbreaking discoveries, but from unwavering persistence, from loyalty that never faltered, from a love that grew silently through each long, waiting day. They were a complete family, not because of what they had lost or found, but because of the deep bond forged through every second of trial. They were the embodiment of a science that refused to yield to impossibility, of a love that would not burn out through the storms of time, and of a brave dog who had never once turned back. The sun rose higher over the distant mountains, its warm, golden light spilling onto the small patch of earth where they sat. Bruno wagged his tail softly, gazing up at Ellie and Michael with eyes full of peace. There was no need for any more grand adventures, no need for more grueling journeys. They had found the most precious thing, the dream, the goal, the silent prayer their tears and hopes had reached for over 4 long years. They had found each other, and this time, beneath the gentle light of morning, with the silent witness of the earth and the stars now faded away, they knew they would never lose each other again. Bruno rose, trotting toward the sun-drenched path, his tail curled high like a triumphant exclamation mark to the silent epic they had written together. Ellie and Michael clasped hands and followed Bruno, their steps firm, their breaths filled with light, carrying an unbreakable faith that no matter how deep the darkness, the light born of loyalty, love, and enduring trust could never be extinguished. A journey closed, a new life began, and among the sunlit fields, the rustling whispers of the ancient trees, and the blossoming flowers of Hope Garden, the heart of a family finally beat with the eternal rhythm of happiness. As the last rays of sunlight slipped through the ancient trees of Adira Forest, the journey of Ellie, Michael, and Bruno found its close, making way for a new life where loyalty, love, and quiet faith became the eternal miracle woven into every moment they would share. Do you believe that somewhere in your own life there might be a Bruno too, a soul, big or small, silently watching over you, waiting, never giving up, no matter what happens in the world? If this story touched your heart, don't forget to leave a like, share this video with those you love, and subscribe to our channel to help spread more warm stories like this one. Thank you for staying with us until the very last moments of this journey.